Chapter 661 Victory Speech. Dominic hopped down from the stands and called for the veiled maids to bring forth the cash portion of the prize, the part that would impress the viewers. Then, he handed the Magitech wine flasks to the two finalists, who both smiled happily as they examined the canteens. "I see how it is. You give us the method to make wine, and the prize includes monster cores to help level the wine flask. So, we end up spending half the money we won immediately." Sir Nalin joked quietly. "It's that or drink substandard wine." Dominic whispered back, while making a show of holding up the second wine flask for the crowd to see before handing it to Sir Charles. Then, a large trophy was brought out, made entirely of silver and gold, shining in the sun for everyone to see. It had to be fantastically expensive, and Dominic realized that it was a gift from the king to the winner of the joust. So, while in theory it could be sold, it likely never would be. Those sorts of royal gifts were a sign of favor, and selling them immediately would only be either an insult to the king or a sign of poverty, which would also be seen as an insult to the king. After all, if the knights of the realm were so desperately poor that they had to resort to selling off royal gifts, how poor was the governance of the royal family? So, this trophy would remain the centerpiece of Sir Charles's family home for generations, a lingering memory of the time that one of their ancestors managed to impress the king enough to give them such a wonderful treasure. That was something that might never happen again, and even most earls and counts proudly displayed only one or two such treasures from generations of illustrious history. But now that Dominic thought about it, even his household didn't have such a treasure. Did it count if you got to show off one of his daughters? Surely that had to count for something. Sir Charles looked absolutely stunned as the trophy was brought out, standing nearly 30 centimeters tall and heavy in the hands of even the magically strengthened veiled maid. The knight bowed deeply toward the royal booth. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for this honor. I will treasure it all my days." The king nodded politely, but remained silent, so as not to disrupt the rest of the event. Once the king started speaking, everything would get more formal. But if he was just here to watch and give a gift, they could continue as normal. Sir Charles held the trophy high as he turned to show it to the crowd, knowing that only those closest to the field would actually be able to see what the statue was, beyond the general form. It was designed to replicate a knight on a rearing horse, with a broken lance in his hand. But both the barding and the knight's shield had the Cygnian national emblem on them, an honor usually reserved for knights that were in direct service to the crown. The royal guards wore it, the palace guards as well. But the common soldiers wore the army's battle standards, or the emblems of the nobles whose lands they were raised from. Even the Cygnia city guards didn't wear it. They wore the emblem of the city lord, who was a duke and advisor to the king. The final prize awards were only the smallest part of the final event, as the fun part started immediately after. It was traditional to bring all of the nobles and knights together one last time, a meal to send them on their way, so that they weren't leaving hungry or injured, but the noble hosting the event would also give out alms to the poor, food and drink, perhaps a bit of coin, to show that he appreciated his people. Dominic knew that it wasn't money that most of the people in town were lacking. There was enough work that nearly everyone would be more appreciative of a day off than an extra day's pay. So, instead, he made a different announcement. The remainder of the stock that the stand vendors have will be purchased by the duchy, to be distributed free to those in attendance. Everyone, please enjoy your day. Nothing said, "Have a great day," like free beer. Nothing. Alexis did her best to hide her laughter as the crowd roared in approval every bit as loud as they had for anything during the event, while the vendors who had come to sell in the stands celebrated alongside them. Having no leftovers at the end of an event was a huge win for them. Nothing would be wasted, and it would encourage everyone to stay in the stands even though the event itself was over. Normally, they would go out into the grounds to try to sell off the rest of what was prepared, and those with Magitech freezers would start packing up everything that wasn't hot and ready. But today, they could sell everything that they had on hand, and call it a win without the need to sell the rest of their hard work at another event, or at the market square. "You know that nobody is getting anything done at work tomorrow, right?" Sir Charles informed Dominic over the roaring of the crowd. Dominic clasped his hand to raise the knight's fist in victory, bringing even more cheers from the audience. "Of course. but working with a hangover is nothing new to most of them. Besides, with so many refugees in the audience, gorging themselves on free food and loading their pockets with something to take home, assuming that there is enough left, will save their reserves and keep them eating more than rolled oats until payday. Sir Nalin smiled and shook his head. That was a brilliant move from the standpoint of a noble looking to build loyalty among his people. But it's going to cost you. Dominic nodded. That it will, but it's totally worth it. I've been that level of desperate before, and the little things like this will stick in your memory for years. Chapter 662. The Advisor's Skills. As the crowd celebrated, the knights and the royal family retreated to the manor to hold a more private celebration of the end of the tournament. All of their tents and gear had been packed before the final joust started, as none were expecting to stay in the grounds another night. Some would stay in the duchy, but now that the event had finished and they were not out to show off for the crowds, they could request a room at the manor or at one of the inns in town. With the recent expansions, Westover Manor's complex was capable of hosting far more people than even most small castles. 40 or 50 bedrooms was considered to be substantial for a small castle, but they had built the other buildings around the back gardens and courtyards, so Westover had proven capable of hosting hundreds of guests in relative comfort. Perhaps not at the same standard as the royals were hosted, but even the manor itself had 24 guest rooms. Dave greeted them at the gates and presented each of the knights with a handmade gift, a garland of medicinal flowers that was supposed to help healing, but which didn't require any healing magic to create. It also smelled fairly similar to chamomile tea, not a bad combination for the weary. If actual healing was needed, the garland could be given to a witch coven, who would use most of it to make an actual healing potion. But for now, the trolls were happy to let everyone rely on the passive effect, while feeling confident that they had not been rude to the guests. They had even asked Beth to make extra soup for the knights. While most of the household was celebrating, Alistair and Lord Blackwell retreated to the study to keep up with their work. They had been studying the pattern of impostors looking for Westover Duchy, and they believed that they had made some headway in finding the actual culprits behind it. They had already determined, thanks to Rill's information, that it was a group in the Burlish Empire that was doing the inquiries. However, they had managed to track down a bit more information through their own networks of informants. The far west of the continent was largely lawless in general, but it was also largely overrun by monsters. The mages who had been looking into Westover were reputed to be part of a cult of monster hunters, hardline sorts who believed that the monster species should be eliminated from the continent. How far they wanted to go, and what species they deemed unacceptable were both unclear points at this time, but they had been repeatedly rejected by the nations of the southeast, which were even more human-dominated than even Signia was. Not as anti-sorcerer as Dagos, but still nearly all human. That made the pair of intelligence experts wonder just what was up with this cult. If they were anti-monster, but unacceptable to the human nations, what was it about their doctrine that was causing the issue? None of their agents had been able to tell them that, only vague details gleaned from visitor logs noting that their application to see many influential nobles had been rejected over the last decade. That was likely unrelated to their current efforts, but it painted a picture of the situation and gave some idea of what sort of group they were looking into. The group that was looking into Westover also wasn't a powerful one. They didn't even hold a whole city, they just had a scattered presence in a few around the same region, with a small rural base of operations. Clearly, they had some impressive infiltration magic, but other than that, they could not be considered a major power. So, they currently had their people trying to look into the group and their motivations. The current line of speculation between the two was that they might actually not care that Dominic was a Wavemate's dragonkin, and they might have actually been looking into the weapons productions of Signia, without asking about them directly. If they already knew about the rifles and mortars, then asking about the products that Westover was selling could have been a leading line of questioning to see if Westover was selling guns to foreign forces. For a group that was adamantly anti-monster, getting their hands on Magitech weapons that were being widely credited for the victory over the monster sieges both in Signia and in Skipple would be huge. The problem was that neither of them had managed to get enough clear information yet to know if they were actually after the products that Westover was selling for a resale reason, or if they were truly after military power. Both were possible, Both were likely, but only one of the two was likely to be the case. I have fresh intelligence on them. It looks like they're a mix of sorcerers and humans, not a purely human force. Lord Blackwell explained as he looked at the communication device in his hand. That is excellent news. It nearly rules out them wanting to kill the Duke for being Dragonkin. Alistair replied with a relieved sigh. Indeed. The information that I've managed to get confirms that they are hardline anti-monster, but it appears to be aimed mostly against the ogre and goblin clans. They are apparently known to keep dire wolves as hunting companions, so they're not against working with magical beasts. The aging spymaster added. What sort of cult is this? Could they just be some sort of ogre hate group? I don't think that would be controversial enough that others would refuse to work with them. Ogres are pretty universally hated, and nobody likes goblins. Lord Blackwell shrugged. That part isn't clear. I don't have anyone in the towns that they're operating in, and opening a portal to them would be suspicious, given their rural nature. We will have to wait a few days to get more. However, we did dig up one more detail. When they visited Southern Axbridge, looking to trade for magical scrolls a few years back, their representative was part troll. Alistair pinched the bridge of his nose. They're not another loyalist group, are they? Because if we start importing foreign cultists into the duchy, the king is going to flay us alive. Lord Blackwell laughed. I can't rule it out, but they might just be looking for a trade agreement with the one nobleman who is definitely not going to turn away a trollish ambassador. Chapter 663. Things in Common. While the advisors struggled to find meaning behind the strange events that were constantly befalling Westover, Dominic and the other nobles were having a grand time on the main floor, with music provided by a combination of the royal guards and the veiled maids. Alexis had been busy teaching her staff everything that they might possibly need to know to entertain guests, and one of the lessons that they had enjoyed the most was how to play various string and wind instruments. It wasn't entirely a selfless endeavor, as the primary reason that the maids were taught to play instruments was because instrument cases were almost always searched for weapons and contraband. And with them as a distraction, much more could sneak through. If the location that they were headed to was searching for storage magic, they could imbue it into a musical item case, which would naturally trigger the sensors, but leave them with nothing to find, as the case was only preserving the state of the instrument. It was very similar magic, but it wasn't an actual storage device. And with everyone distracted by the maid, the rest of the team, including any infiltration elements that they required, could slip in undetected. Unless the target was a royal or particularly paranoid, it was an easy win. Of course, if it was a royal who knew the trick and had enough security to ensure that nobody got past during a busy moment, or someone paranoid enough that they hired a massive security force, it would just annoy whoever got stuck in line behind them. Fortunately, when it was the entertainment, they wouldn't stay mad for long. Today, they were playing lively tunes, but from an upper balcony, with the curtains closed so that the sound was muffled and became a background mood-setting amenity as everyone drank and celebrated. There was no need for them to overpower the conversation. This was not a dance hall. At least, not at the moment. Sir Charles, congratulations on your latest victory. What are the plans now? Will you be joining us in Mitfield at the end of the month? Prince Damien asked, a fresh glass of rum in his hand. Actually, this will be my last victory. Duke Dominic has offered me a permanent position here as the Director of Entertainment and Head of Arena Events in Westover. So, going out on the high note, I will be retiring from the circuit and taking up the role of promoter. The prince laughed at his earnest tone. Well, we can't say that you haven't earned the spot. But that's a brilliant bit of marketing on your part, taking the job right after you've won the tournament. The locals will practically worship you as you settle into the position, instead of questioning your credentials. The Mitfield Royal Paladins nodded along. It was an excellent way to start out his new career, and very similar to the logic that they had in proving themselves both on the battlefield and in the just before taking up their positions as dukes. It would let them get to know everyone and be known for something other than academics. Among their peers, that was fine, but with the older generation, being known for nothing but being a schoolboy was not exactly enough to impress them when it came time to negotiate trade deals or cooperative projects. There had been an incident a generation ago where a young and visionary nobleman had wanted to build a dam, a hydroelectric dam, to supplement the power going to the factories and city lights in Mitfield's capital region. Of course, the older generation saw no need for that. They had magitech and techno-wizards. What was the point of eliminating the magical half of things and relying only on the technology when it was clearly the inferior half? So, he had fought for decades before another batch of young nobles came along and completely redesigned the whole project. Instead of a simple electrical dam, they wanted to build a magitech dam, one that used the water pressure to drive a mana generator, which would store magic in a massive mana crystal array. Then, the mana could be transmitted wirelessly to the capital through a set of magitech arrays, where it would power the magitech lights and storage stations. It seemed like a whole extra step in his simple plan, but as he had been advocating for a dam for a very similar purpose for years, he enthusiastically supported the proposal, and they finally got it built over a decade later. It turned out that the magitech generator had reliability issues and required frequent maintenance by an extremely skilled techno-wizard. But the project had the right idea, and when it was operational, Midfield ran their capital almost entirely on stored mana. At this point, a generation later, it was viewed more as a work project, keeping the techno-wizards busy. But it was still working. And that was the sort of cooperation that they were hoping to have from the start of their time as dukes. Not the middle. Dominic didn't know the story, but Alexis had made it very clear to him that making friends with everyone whose lands bordered his was important, even if they were not local. Particularly if they were not local. A baron or count under the Signian king would not cause a major international incident if they got into an argument with the duchy. But if it was a noble from Dagos, Mitfield, or Axbridge, all of whom bordered Stantia province, that was a very real possibility. Fortunately, they all had a lot in common here. There were no cowards, no academics, and no shut-in isolationists among the nobles of the region. Everyone who bordered Stantia province had been to war in person, not just having sent soldiers on behalf of their holdings. And that turned what would normally be a very stiff and formal event into something closer to a guardsman's tavern that just happened to have a king and crown prince in attendance. Chapter 664. Rescuing Eleanor Again. The party at the end of the jousting tournament was a turning point for Westover, Dominic believed. Finally, they were going to be down to just the long-term residents of the manor complex. The envoys, their assistants, and the household staff. But the majority of those people would be moving into their own building, with its own staff, its own cook and guards. That was going to be a huge change around Westover, and Dominic wondered if he was going to have to get used to the quiet again. He certainly wanted it, but he couldn't say that he was used to a quiet house anymore. What he could say was that it was going to be so much less work for the staff once everyone had cleared out of the compound. After the debutante event, they could have all used a vacation, but it just bled right into the royal negotiations and became a much longer than intended period of extreme workload. But it wasn't over yet, and he still had to pass the last great hurdle. Crown Prince Claudius and his sister complex. Dominic moved gracefully through the room, headed for the corner where Princess Eleanor was seated, chatting politely with the knights as her brother chaperoned. Crown Prince, if you would like to join the festivities, I am willing to supervise these fine gentlemen as they attempt to learn more about my dear sister-in-law this evening, he offered. Claudius frowned. He knew that he couldn't sit with her all night long, but he also wasn't ready to throw his sister to the wolves. With her level of hero worship for her paladin older sisters, there was an extremely high chance that she might actually be weak against the flirtations of the knights here in this room. Especially those paladins from Mitfield. That would be another sister taken out of the country by marriage, and he would be very nearly out of them entirely. Couldn't she just find a nice simp to marry into the royal family and stay home as a house husband? Of course, his father would never allow that. Anyone who married the Signian princesses had to be of the utmost quality. But a boy could dream. If Eleanor could have heard him refer to himself that way, she would have laughed herself silly. Crown Prince Claudius' boyhood was far behind him at this point. His own offspring would be moving from childhood tutors to public schools soon. My thanks, Lord Dominic. Take good care of her, and I will be back after a short conversation with Prince Damien and my brothers. The Crown Prince excused himself, and Dominic took his seat, then brought out the good wine with a sly wink for Eleanor. Naturally, she was no stranger to the beverage, but it would encourage the knights to stay and chat, and not just make polite small talk for a half-minute under the intense scrutiny of her eldest brother. "Did you enjoy the joust, princess?" Dominic asked politely as he got settled. "Immensely. We haven't had one in the palace in far too long, and usually it's only the local knights who compete, not the whole circuit.
You know how it is.
The royal joust is primarily for showing off in front of potential marriage partners, not for the actual event," she replied with a hint of sadness. "Actually, I did not know that. I've never seen one in the capital, but I suppose that it makes sense. With so many nobles in one spot, it's bound to become more of a social event than an actual gathering of miliary minds." The royal paladins from Mitfield nodded in agreement. The actual circuit doesn't stop in any of the capital cities. The knights that are on it aren't usually the sort that are fit for marrying into a wealthy family from the capital, and they're in it for the event itself, not for the socializing. This one was a bit unique, in that we got to do all the socializing, but there were none of the pampered noble brats that you would usually get when there were royals in attendance. Sir Karath explained. Sir Lars chuckled softly. "Indeed. Last time that I attended the royal joust was nearly a year ago, and I don't think that anyone save for a handful of young ladies whose parents hoped mine would arrange a marriage were actually watching the event. As a fan of the sport itself, I much prefer when palace politics and marriage arrangements are not part of the itinerary for the tournament. Now, if the youngest of the Signian paladin princesses changes her mind, my father would likely agree to let me wait a few more years for marriage." Eleanor laughed at his clearly teasing tone. "I highly doubt that. I suspect that by the time that you arrive home, you'll have a bride and 2 burly guards with restraints waiting for you at the gates. They won't let you run off a moment longer than royally decreed." She snapped back. "It hurts that you know my life so well." "As long as it's not Mildred, we should be fine," he complained. Dominic slowly realized that they all knew each other already and weren't meeting for the first time. He likely should have known that from the start, given their rank and position. But as they were from different countries, it had somehow slipped his mind. Even though Prince George Mitfield was the princess' favorite uncle, and his territory bordered some of theirs. Eleanor sipped at the wine that Dominic poured, and then her eyes went wide in surprise. "Oh, this is much better than expected. Is that why everyone has been raving about your Magitech wine?" she asked. "I put the spell into the sorcerer's spellbook, so it casts at the same level as the others I've got stored there. A bit unnecessary, I suppose. But the wine is excellent. Sir Charles and Sir Nalin will likely be spending a large portion of their winnings upgrading their wine flasks after tasting the difference that a few levels can make. It's still not the same as the local brews, with their unique flavors and subtle notes, but it's very good. And an excellent reason for us to stay here and keep the princess company." Sir Lars agreed. Chapter 665, Sending Them Home. The next morning marked the final day that the majority of the royals would be in Westover, according to the veiled maids, when they woke Dominic at first light. The king would be departing with the crown prince, Princess Eleanor and Prince Alex, leaving only Prince Russell behind, as he had been assigned to remain in Westover to represent royal interests in the new Alliance Bank. As such, Dominic braced himself for the inevitably tearful and borderline extortionate attempt to remain behind that Princess Eleanor was likely to make, in order to stay with her sister and out of the influence of the capital's event planners. "Is there any other news that I should be aware of before we head down?" Dominic asked, accepting a clean shirt as he stepped out of the shower. "Your new investigative team will not be at breakfast. Gordy, Alistair, and Lord Blackwell were all working until just a few hours ago, investigating leads into the group that has been inquiring about you. I don't know what they might have found yet, but they were getting updates. Sir Nalin of Shersdonia also intends to depart first thing this morning, but he will be accompanying a merchant guild caravan overland. The rest of the knights will be departing at some point during the day, likely in a group. We have arranged for them to meet with one of the mages from the Duskblade sect who will open a portal if they need one. We consider it a service of the duchy, as they're not charging for the effort as they normally would. Other than that, we have noticed an unusually large grain crop in the last few days. I was speaking with the bakery, the city's largest flour customer, and they mentioned that the influx has decreased the price, so they have been stocking up. You may wish to accelerate those plans to have more granaries built. However, there should have been more of them here in Westover to begin with, shouldn't there? Even a small town as Westover had been at that time would have needed them with the number of pulse crops they produced. Dominic nodded. There were more and a potato barn underground. They were destroyed during, or just after the attack. The same is the case all over the former Wavemates lands. Other than in a few of the larger cities, all the granaries were destroyed to mark that they had been emptied by the army. Any that survived now were mostly rebuilt by the locals after the battle. In that case, I will inform the infrastructure team when they arrive with their reports that it is of the highest priority. There should be more documents waiting for you in your office. There always are. Dominic agreed. How he had ended up volunteering for a life of paperwork was beyond him, but Dominic was beginning to strongly empathize with the princesses and their obsession with going monster hunting. It was a wonderful way to work off frustrations. Dressed in his finest silk shirt, Dominic escorted Alexis to breakfast, presenting the perfect image of domestic harmony and noble grace. It was mostly a show, but to the majority of the nobles present, it was not their appearance that mattered, but the casually intimate affection they showed which was the cause for envy. For the king, it was a reminder of life before the stress of the throne wore everything down to routine. For the majority of the others, it was a reminder that they were still single. But for Prince Russell it was a painful reminder that he was out of bed entirely too early when he could have been sleeping next to his wife, had his father and brother not decided to leave at an ungodly early hour of the morning. His hangover was not cooperating with this schedule. Everyone took their seats, ready to say goodbye. But the moment that the food was brought out, Alexis immediately felt queasy and rushed from the room, flanked by a pair of maids and followed by 2 of the royal guards. "Dave," Dominic called, bringing a pair of the trolls in. "Boss, check the food again." Something set off the princess. "It smells fine to me, but another purification spell shouldn't hurt anything." "Got it, boss." The king frowned. He also had purification magic and a detection amulet that would alert him if there were spoiled ingredients or poison in the meal. Not that he expected either from Beth's kitchen. But he hadn't gotten any warning, and if the food smelled fine to the dragonkin, the issue was more likely to be with Alexis than the meal. For a few tense minutes, he seriously considered delaying his departure, or perhaps instituting a quarantine for an unknown virus. Then the leader of Alexis' Royal Guard team came back out smiling. "Your Majesty, please rest assured that the meal is fine." The princess' current state was not caused by the meal, but by Lord Dominic. The king glared at him as the wheels slowly turned in everyone's heads. Dominic had caused the princess to become ill at the first sign of food? What sort of curse was that? And why would he? Oh, the princess was pregnant. That was most definitely Duke Dominic's fault, and explained the situation perfectly. Her state was confirmed by Millie the Garden Witch, whose magic was perfectly attuned to such things, but arrangements were made to have a midwife with suitable magic brought in for confirmation. This would be the first heir to the duchy, as well as being a grandson to the king. Technically, Princess Alexis had married out of the royal family to join the Wavemates family, but that didn't change the king's love of grandchildren. There was only one person in the room not celebrating this morning's glorious news. Princess Eleanor. She was about to be dragged back to her studies and her boring daily life, just as things were finally getting interesting here. "Father, perhaps I might remain behind a while? To provide moral support to my dearest sister in her time of need. My royal tutors are already here. My studies won't suffer." She began quietly, while the king smiled indulgently at her. The timing was perfect. He was riding the wave of bliss that came with news of a grandchild. Unfortunately for her, the king had heard this news many times before and was not as soft as he once was. Chapter 666. Hold the presses. By the time that Alexis rejoined them at the table, the food was cold. But that didn't matter, as her appetite hadn't yet returned, and the knowing looks that the men were giving her were making her want to smack someone, not sit politely at a meal. "Welcome back and congratulations." Dominic greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. Alexis growled at him, and Dominic laughed. "What? It's better than having people congratulate me. I'm quite certain that my contribution to the situation has already been adequately rewarded." The king snorted with laughter, as the tradition was that most would congratulate the duke on his impending heir. Only the fact that the princess was present in the room had changed the celebration from one of succession to a personal event where the mother was the focus, and not the noble house as a whole. I suppose that we can't run off so early. Or, are you going to hold on to the news for a few weeks until the pregnancy is stabilized? Sir Nalin asked curiously. He was originally planning to head out today and make some money on a guard duty before the next tournament. Dominic turned to Alexis, who was waiting for him to say something. I think that we will wait to make the announcement public. There has already been so much going on for the duchy that if we add a celebration for my princess to the mix, it will lose meaning. But a month from now, or even 2 months, when she is showing, it will be a much better time to make the announcement public. It's enough that everyone here already knows that a new generation of royal paladins is on the way. Prince Alex coughed into his arm to hide his laughter, while Prince Claudius sighed and the king smiled. Well said. This young one is destined for greatness on the battlefield. Born to a mighty paladin, formed during the greatest joust that Westover has seen to date. What else could they grow up to be but a mighty warrior? Sir Charles agreed. Hear, hear. The king called, and everyone raised their glasses in a toast, with the staff hastily replacing the princess wine with a glass of fresh juice from the pitcher they had brought for Eleanor. A pregnant lady of the house was going to change all the menus, Beth realized. Many of the sauces had ale or wine in them, and not all of them were the sort where the alcohol was burned off in the cooking process. Especially the ale, or mead-based sauces. It was not much, but tradition held that no alcohol was allowed for expectant mothers. But more importantly, they were going to have to silently switch out the coffee for a decaffeinated, or mostly decaffeinated blend without her noticing. Coffee was also on the royal taboo list for the time being, but it was safer for everyone involved if that fact was never mentioned to the ones who were to be denied it. Fortunately, they had Dave with them, who could find a way to make something that was suitable without the princess noticing. Or perhaps they could convince her to switch to herbal teas. If one of the royal midwives were here, they would certainly be pushing it. Beth found her mind running in a dozen different directions as the plan for the next few months of manor life, while everyone else worried about the day-to-day issues. The incidental problems, like the fact that very soon her armor would no longer fit and that she would have to forgo monster hunting for some time. That issue alone was going to be enough to turn the manor on its head. The fact that they were not going to make the news public did not mean that Dominic didn't intend to celebrate the fact early. The problem was that he was a terrible party planner and not significantly better at giving gifts. Would it be insensitive to make her a sword to commemorate the moment? That seemed like it should be something that was given after the birth, when she could use it freely, not at conception. But what did you get for a beloved wife at this moment? A baby-related keepsake seemed like it would be a good idea. Perhaps Pops had a blueprint for something suitable? A Magitech bassinet would be practical and stylish. Or perhaps something more personal. He could make her a hand-engraved serving tray to bring her meals on. A little daily reminder that he cared. Even when she was not happy with him for causing this condition. Pops was at breakfast, as was his tradition. But he was at the other end of the table, and going over there now would make it look like Dominic wasn't even trying to come up with the idea on his own. It was better to do it later, in case he came up with something unique on his own. However, the longer that he waited, the harder this was going to get. The princes and the king were already placing orders for something, and it was likely to be in stock at the palace, given how many royal children were born in this generation. If they started to deliver all the good things and easy ideas first, he was really going to have to scramble. While Dominic panicked about trying to find the perfect gift, Alexis silently laughed at him. He was trying so hard to come up with just the right idea that he had completely forgotten that his brain did not work like that of a normal human. His ideas were almost guaranteed to be so completely out of the ordinary that few of the others would even think to give them. If she was right, he was likely thinking of Magitech and weapons, not embroidered blankets and commemorative dishware. It was a sure sign that he knew her personal tastes, but also far out of the ordinary for a maternity gift. Chapter 667. Pops has the plan. As soon as breakfast was over, Dominic went to Pops to help him with the planning for the gift. The old dwarf was already expecting him to come for advice, as there weren't too many other people he could ask. At least not ones who would give good ideas, and who weren't obligated to give the early celebratory gifts. The gift to celebrate the pregnancy news was typically only for close family, and everyone else would give baby gifts only after the birth. It was superstitious, not wanting to celebrate too early in case there were complications with the pregnancy. But it was also practical, as it gave everyone half a year to save and plan if they were short on money when they first heard the news. Giving gifts on short notice was not easy. All right, what did you have in mind, so I know how much work we need to do? Pops asked as soon as they were alone. I was thinking Magitech bassinet. Dominic replied. That's far better than I expected of you. It seems that marriage is giving you some sensibility after all. Pops joked, a smile slowly spreading on his face, mostly hidden by beard. Oh, ye of little faith. I do have some good ideas. At least, I hope that this is a good idea. Pops made a non-committal gesture. It's likely a good idea, but there are no guarantees if it's a daughter of yours. You think it's going to be a girl first? Pops shrugged. No telling this early, though the girls usually get their magic earlier than the boys. Being as magical as you are, there is a good chance that she will be capable of activating Magitech long before she is ready to leave the bassinet. Whether she figures out how to actually do it is a different matter. But if she can make the thing rock her to sleep, it might actually be a big win for the wet nurse and nanny. Dominic laughed at the thought of a baby rocking itself to sleep, then remembered that he too used to have a bed that rocked itself. He didn't have any memories of his parents casting a spell to do it, so it should have been Magitech. It wasn't in the house when he grew up, and he didn't see one in the manor either. So, it likely went to someone else living in the area once he had outgrown it. It really was a wonderful accessory for a child. The motion was soothing and sent them right to sleep. So, I don't suppose that you know how to make one? Ordering a custom one from the Merchants Guild would take some time, since they're working on their own schedule. But if you have a blueprint and no time, I can make it. Or we can make it together, and you get bonus brownie points with Cook Beth for putting the Duchess in a good mood. Dominic joked. Pops winked at him. She'll understand. With so many years cooking for the royal family and their staff, she's well versed in the peculiar tempers of pregnant women of all sorts. Now, I'm sure that I have one here somewhere. It's not quite what you're looking for. I think it's a rocking chair. But we can put that on a bassinet or a crib easily enough. That sounds like just the sort of thing that we need. Or just making her a Magitech rocking chair now, and the crib later. No, crib first, because it needs to be there before the baby. Rocking chair later. Dominic realized. Now you're getting it. All right, let me find that blueprint, and you can head back to my forge to tell Mead what the plan for the day is. Dominic nodded, while Pops settled into a comfortable chair to search through his storage items. It had to be in there somewhere. But if it wasn't, he could make a new one before he went back and just pretend that it took him longer than expected to find what he wanted. Fortunately for everyone, it was right where he expected it to be, in the furniture section that he rarely used anymore, since so few people came to him for metal bed frames and such these days. When he was a younger smith, he made many of them. But then when he took residence by the gates, his business model was to sell the things that adventurers and mercenaries headed out the gates would need on short notice, so he rarely had to make anything other than tools and daily necessities. He enjoyed it, but it was a rather specialized business for a master smith. Now, with Dominic and his fancy magic for upgrading metals, they could make all sorts of top-quality parts for a baby holder. Something fit for a royal, and strong enough to hold up to a young dragon, if that's what they ended up having. Cartbright would hold up to baby dragon fire, even if the bedding wouldn't. But they could also make it out of dark iron, which wouldn't reflect moonlight, which would make it easier to sleep. Dark iron and gold or silver would be a nice combination for a royal bed. Or dark iron and Cartbright, since they could make both of those from clay, and he could make a more decorative design by carving it and reusing it. Hand-carved was great, but uniformity made things look professional. Pops inspected the blueprints, and then made a mental calculation of what he would need to change in the circuitry to make it baby-proof as a crib. As he had expected, it was a rocking chair design. However, it did sit flat on the ground, with a sliding base, to reduce wear on wooden floorboards. A weighted pendulum moved with gears, swaying back and forth to rock the chair. Or the user could do it. But that was far less entertaining. Chapter 668. Dominic has the materials. Pops joined the others at the forge, where Dominic was already heating the forge, and Mead had brought out all the tools that they were likely to need for the project, including the good carving tools. Unfortunately for her, most of the carving was going to be done into wax, which didn't require nearly as many implements. Certainly not a 2-kilo mallet for the chisel. Boss, welcome back. I've got everything set. The only thing we're missing is a more talented journeyman. Did you know that he has a spell to make wine, but not one to make ale? Mead complained. It's unfortunate, but he is a dragon. You have to excuse some personality quirks. Dominic rolled his eyes and filled the empty keg on the table by the door with level 10 conjured wine. You might not like drinking wine, but I'm sure you'll survive one day of free drinks. I'll ask someone to find me a create ale or create mead spell gem later. The two dwarves shared a knowing smile. They might not be mage types who could easily memorize a spell, and they didn't have mage-type trade skill cores. But with Dominic around, that didn't mean that they would not find a way to make kegs of ale anyhow. They would send the front desk clerk to go talk to the Sans Sec later. The trolls over there likely knew the spell. She couldn't leave yet, though. There were still going to be far too many customers coming in the next few days, people who had settled in the further baronies delaying going home for a day or two until they had everything that they needed. Some would order from the Merchants Guild, but delivery to the baronies increased the price of goods. Not usually by much, but it was more than buying it in the big city. So, they would enjoy the amenities for a few more days, stock up until they were almost out of coin, saving only a little for emergencies, and bring back as much as humanly possible. While she helped with the customers, happily wearing the uniform that Mead had modified to help her distract the men, Dominic and the dwarves got right to work, making plans for how to alter the design of the crib to be suitable for longer-term use, but safe for children. Dwarves had a very stupidity tax view on childhood injuries, but that probably wasn't going to fly with the royal family. Knowing Dominic, he likely wouldn't even recognize the dangers in some of the designs, like the old drop-side cribs. They had been banned by most nations at this point, though there were likely many still in use. The problem was that if the latches failed while the child was trying to climb out the side, the dropping side could land on a limb or head, causing serious injuries. So, it had been replaced by the swing-side version, which many thought were a nuisance, but they were the only decent option, unless you went fancy with one that swung upwards. But those only worked well for seated or short parents. Perhaps he could make one that swung all the way over? It would be out of the way, the front would be fully open for easy access, and no risk of injury except while closing. Perhaps it still had issues. Fortunately, Pops knew more than a little about modern furniture design in the human fashion. So, he quickly designed a gate that opened in the middle, so it didn't swing so far into the room, and made it decorative, with the emblem of the duchy on one side and the royal family on the other. Then, they designed the side poles to look like stretching dragons, with their wings linking them for stability. Alright, I think that we have the basics. Dominic, make the form for the side rails. Mead, you're on the frame. Dominic, make her a bunch of dark iron for that, and we will wrap it with bright designs later. I will make the gates and the rocking mechanism. Pops instructed. Got it, boss. The other two replied in unison, which made Mead laugh. They might have shared the same master, but they hadn't spent much time working together before. Even now, Dominic was mostly only transforming metals for her to forge and then designing the pillars for the bed rails. The design didn't take too long. The hard part was making the scales match up on the two halves of the mold. Having a misalignment would be annoying, especially when they were going to have to hand-finish them all anyhow so that the mold lines were gone and the pieces looked carved. After a moment's consideration, Dominic made the dragons in a pair, facing opposite directions, so they were embracing each other. It took longer to carve, but it would make the design much more elaborate, and he only had to do a little work after making the first and heating it to get the majority of the outline done in one shot. With that finished, Dominic made a whole stack of posts for the crib, enough that they had spares in case of damage, or to start them on another of the same design. Alright, Mead, start assembling the bed itself. Dominic, run next door to the carriage maker and tell him we need a mattress for the crib. He can make you one in an hour or so, and nobody else in town has the proper filling materials for a baby crib.
Pops ordered.
Got it. I'll be right back. Dominic walked into the carriage maker and saw that there were multiple pre-made options for seats on display. Now it made sense why Pops was so certain that the man would be able to make them a proper mattress. The quality was outstanding. I need a mattress for a baby crib. These are the dimensions we're working with, he explained as the man looked up from his paperwork. How soon do you need it? As soon as possible. The Duchess just found out she's pregnant, and I'll be in trouble if I don't have a proper gift for her before her brothers get theirs delivered. The carriage maker laughed, then looked at the dimensions. All right, this will be quick. I already have a cushion cut nearly that size. It's a standard carriage internal seat size. Give or take a bit. If I put it in a silk wrap, I can have it within the hour. Is gold fine? I don't have many colors of silk. I only keep them for curtains. But I have red, gold, and black. Red didn't seem right for a mattress, and black probably had some connotation that Dominic was overlooking, so he nodded in agreement. Gold will be perfect. Just bring it to Pop's place when it's ready. We're finishing up a Magitech crib in the next hour or two. Chapter 669. A Thing of Beauty. Half an hour later, Dominic was looking at a fully finished crib, while putting the finishing touches on the engraving and polishing of the posts. The mattress had just arrived, and they realized that the design needed a bit more gold to it to make it balanced, and to properly represent the golden dragon lineage of the Wavemates family. So, Dominic had donated the gold coins, and Pops had smelted them to do the artwork. Now, all that was left was polishing everything until it was ready to present as a gift. The more that they worked at it, the more time that Dominic had to realize that he was actually becoming the responsible adult in the room. Sure, he had titles for a while, but that was only responsibility for other adults in a workplace setting. If he slacked on his duties as a duke for a day, it wasn't a big deal. If you slacked on your duties as a father for a day, bad things would happen. The baby wouldn't just go get their own lunch if you didn't remember to check on them for a while. The crib really was a masterpiece of techno-magic, though. It was simple, deceptively so. Looking at it from a distance, it looked like any other child's bed. But the mounting point was actually a mechanical device that would let the bed rock and sway as desired. It was set when activated, so the motion that the child liked best could be selected, or a new one could be tried instantly. I think that she is going to love it, Me decided as Pops did the final test of the motion settings. Should we bring it over? I think we've still got time to present it before the princes get their presents delivered. Dominic suggested. Oh, that will be fun. Yes, let's all go over. Mead agreed. She really wanted to see the response of the princess when they arrived with the crib. They had all poured their hearts into the design of this thing, and it wouldn't look out of place in any royal palace. Hopefully, Alexis would love it as much as Mead did. Dominic moved it to his storage cube and waved goodbye to the front desk worker as he left for the manor, with Pops and Mead right behind him. News had already spread through the city, as Dave had been overjoyed to tell everyone that he met while on patrol. So, it was not a fast trip home. Lord Dominic, will there be a formal holiday for the birth? Your Grace, congratulations. Here, take these. They're best for morning sickness. Every half-minute or so, someone would stop them, either to congratulate Dominic or to offer a gift for the princess. By the time that they got back to the manor, he had no fewer than 4 different forms of soup that were supposed to be good for expectant mothers or morning sickness, and 2 different potions from the witches, neither of which came directly from the witches themselves. Dave greeted them at the door and gave Dominic a thumbs up. They're still waiting for the delivery. You're the first one back, the troll on guard duty at the door informed him. Perfect. We can present our hard work before she's become too jaded by the royal gifts. Pops laughed at Dominic's enthusiasm. If she was going to be jaded by gifts, she would be by now, having grown up in the royal palace, with over a dozen siblings. There were so many gifts given to them every year that their cast-offs sustained the families of most of the staff. It was simply impossible for every member of the royal family to keep every gift that they were given. So most were cycled through, either used up or regifted to lower nobles. The most common example of it was the dresses and jewelry. A princess was given an immense amount of jewelry, and many dresses were made for various events, more than they could keep around. So, They were given or lent to the ladies-in-waiting, noble daughters assisting the princess to increase their visibility to noblemen and build a solid reputation. This one would at least last for most of a decade, while they were still increasing their family size. At least, Dominic assumed things would work that way. Depending on how this pregnancy went, there could either be a lot of little wavemates or only a few. Alexis was in the main dining room with the rest of the family, as well as the emissaries of the other nations who were present. The announcement of her pregnancy had sent them all scrambling with gifts except the Shersdonian emissary, who appeared to have been prepared for this situation. Dominic could see that his gift was wrapped and sitting on a side table. It wouldn't be opened until the royals had made their presentations, an order of priority issue where he had managed to jump the queue simply because he was prepared and present far earlier than usual. Normally, others wouldn't be informed or invited to the manor for a few days. But the emissaries had been at breakfast. The Duke returns. I take it that you managed to find just the right present,
Prince Claudius asked.
Eleanor looked more excited than anyone else to see what he had come up with, and Dominic winked at her as he nodded to the crown prince. Of course, Your Highness. It might have taken a moment to get it finalized, but I have just the thing. Alexis made a get-on-with-it gesture, and Dominic brought out the Magitech crib. Lovingly handcrafted by local artisans, I present to you the latest in Magitech baby care. 3-axis motion, user-adjustable rocking motions, even gentle vibration to help the young one sleep, he announced proudly. The king was immediately on his feet, even before Alexis was. He helped her up, and they came over to where Dominic had placed the crib. I assume that this was a cooperative effort between the three of you? And a custom mattress from the carriage works. Dominic agreed. It's beautiful. Chapter 670. The gifts have arrived. Dominic let the two of them examine the workmanship on the crib, while the king ran his fingers gently over the dragons on the upright posts. We removed all sharp edges from the designs, so there is nothing to poke, while still showing off the design. However, I am informed that the nanny will usually hang a blanket over the interior of the crib for the smaller ones, so it will only be accessible from the outside. Dominic explained. It wasn't something he asked, but something that he remembered his mother doing when he was small, and she wanted him to stop climbing out of any and every enclosure she put him in. He had been quite talented at it. This is beautiful. Is it entirely metal? Planning for it to last generations. Alexis teased. Dominic shrugged. Given your family history, it might see more than enough use in a single generation to be worth designing it in such a sturdy manner. Though, that wasn't the primary concern. We wanted the craftsmanship to show, and this was far better than using wood or other materials. No small hand or minor accident is going to damage a dark iron crib frame. The king poked at the crib. That's dark iron? I thought that you had simply blackened it. Dominic nodded. It's a gift for my wife, so it could only be the best. The silver portions are Cartwright, not stainless steel, and the rest is gold. Even the internal mechanisms of the motion actuator are mostly dark iron. The king smiled. Your grandchildren will be still trying to wear this thing out. I'm glad that you approve, and going by the smile on her face, my wife likes it as well. Personally, I think that it turned out very well. Indeed. Now, we just need to rush our assistants so that we can get the deliveries made. My advisors are beginning to get anxious with me gone from the palace for so long. The princess sighed, and Princess Eleanor looked like she had just been sent to the front lines of a siege. She was not looking forward to going back to her studies, even if she was finally allowed to go to the academy with her friends. The potential for entertainment here in Westover was so much higher. There was always something happening here. But it was inevitable that she would have to return home. Royal policy wouldn't allow her to simply stay here while she was supposed to be studying at an approved royal academy. The academies in Westover were good. The king had inspected them himself. But they didn't have the depth and history to be approved for the royal family's direct lineage.
Not yet.
The door opened to let in a group of men in royal palace uniforms, all bearing gifts on either cushions or on carts, depending on the size. And here we are. Daughter, congratulations on your first impending child. The king announced. The gifts were what Alexis would have expected as announcement gifts. A blanket with the royal family's crest on it, personalized with her own heraldry. It smelled a bit like the storage closets, so someone had made it at least a month or two ago, expecting this exact scenario. Then, there were rattles, engraved dishware with the announcement date on it, infant clothing in the finest of materials, and a tiny rubber sword. That one made Alexis laugh, while Prince Claudius gave Eleanor a disbelieving look. The actual gift is under it. A commemorative necklace for my dearest sister, she explained. Alexis opened the wooden case and admired the necklace, then held it up for Dominic to put it on her. Thank you, Eleanor. It's perfectly lovely. Then, a gentle tap at the door announced one more visitor. A short troll entered holding a wooden box that was clearly fresh cut from a tree. Dominic could still smell cedar sap. It was simply carved and enchanted. So, it was a valuable gift, but Dominic wasn't sure what the trolls would offer. This one wasn't dressed as one from the sect, so it should be the trolls from the nearby town who had sent a gift. Alexis reached down to receive the gift from the diminutive figure and opened the simple box to reveal what looked like a wooden amulet with braided hair around the edge. A health charm from our shamans. It's good for the health of expectant mothers, strong troll magic, the delivery troll explained. Thank your leaders for me. This is beautiful. Alexis replied. It wasn't actually elaborate in its design, but it couldn't be. It was ritual magic, and any extra designs would alter the effect. However, it would work through the box, so she could put it on a dresser in her room and have it perform its function. The troll blushed a little as he bowed, then quickly retreated from the room. Dave, make sure he gets some soup before he goes. It's a long walk home. Dominic whispered. The trolls on guard nodded. They would make sure that their kinsfolk were treated well. Well, it looks like the word has spread. It's nearly a full day's walk to get to the trollish village, and they managed to get you a gift this fast. That's actually impressive. Prince Claudius noted. Prince Russell shook his head and smiled. They likely asked the sect to open a portal for them. The Sand sect has mages stationed at the village, and the mountain trolls can communicate over long distances as long as they're touching solid stone. So, the village would have heard Dave spreading the news, and then arrange something. The Crown Prince shrugged. It sounds much less impressive when you put it that way. It's still pretty impressive. They managed to make a maternity charm with my name on it and get it delivered here as fast as a royal gift. That's impressive no matter who you are, especially considering that they handmade this box today, and the trolls aren't known for hoarding any sort of valuables. Other than food, that is. At the door, Dave nodded in agreement. The trolls shared everything if they could. Piling up things that weren't going to get used just seemed weird to them. It wasn't natural to keep useless things around, so they didn't hoard wealth, they spent it on each other.